So, Alessandra, let me start with a um, emergency question. How's the Guggenheim today? When we are all facing a very challenging context, uh, and the lockdown, the virus, and so on. But I think this context reveals a much more profound, uh, much more problematic uh, challenge to all the institutions, especially for institutions who have a global dimension, let's say, like the Guggenheim in New York, and also with its long historical origin, started in Venice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you, Hanru, and buonasera to everybody. It is an emergency. I say it is an emergency for our cultural institutions, but it is not an emergency for culture itself. We can say that cultural institutions are in crisis, but culture is not in crisis. Artists everywhere, musicians, dancers, performers, poets, writers, thinkers, studio artists, digital artists are working. Nothing can get them to stop working. The platforms that we as museums offer are shut, but that does not mean that our idea machine is shut. There are what we're learning, as I think so many museums around the world are learning, Hanru, is that this digital space is present and ready to be activated in more urgent ways than we have contemplated before. Yes, we've all had digital programs. We have Curator of digital initiatives, but never before has the institution, our public, and our mission been dependent on the glass screen. So I do think from a positive point of view, it is prompting innovation that may be overdue. Because we think of ourselves as global institutions. We know that we get digital visits 6 times more than we get live visits. We get 6 million hits a year on our website, and we get 1 million visitors through the door. We should be already aware that the museum is an ecology that is bigger than the walls that contain the live exhibitions. So I'm on a positive note. I can say that the Guggenheim over the last 5 weeks has seen a 98% increase in our page views. Audio in the first couple of weeks increased by almost 400%. Our podcast, people were tuning in an entirely new kind of momentum. And duration, the time that people are spending on the website has increased by 56%, which is remarkable. We initially were in shock, and what do? So we kind of looked to archival material, Hanru, and tweaked archival material that would feel relevant to put out. Increasingly, we want to work with artists, do studio visits, maybe even commission artists to do projects, but we're extremely aware that we need to honor our artists and pay our artists for that kind of participation. This is a time when the support for artists, although they might be doing their work in whatever condition, we still have a responsibility to support them financially as well as spiritually. Our education department has shifted entirely to online. So where we were teaching classes to kids, we now are doing that. And we have 1,500 students working in the New York area where the teachers have shifted to online learning. But on a more existential level, I think this crisis and this emergency is causing us to have profound questions. And I can't speak for the institution, but I can speak personally. As a curator of global art, which meant that I was traveling 3 or 4 times a month with international travels to Asia and the Middle East once a month. This pace was manic. Who was deciding that pace? Whose dictates were determining that that is the way culture and communication and art making has to happen? I think what we're realizing is we can be global, but let's come back to serve our own communities. Our first order, our first mission is to our cities and our communities. We cannot decouple culture from our communities. There is this eagerness to be international. I've been at the forefront of that for many decades. But we don't have to be international by running around the world. We have to be international in our thinking, in our attitude, in our cosmology, in our generosity. We don't have to be international in our person by showing off how much we trot around the globe. I think it's a time to rethink the metabolism of our institutions. It's okay to slow down. This global pause has enforced us into another kind of relationship with time. We're all very busy inside that new time, but Hanru, it's a new kind of time. On one hand, it's a very urgent time if you're dying in a hospital bed, in a ER room, in some village. On another level, it's asking us all to contemplate the time of our lives, our mortality, in a more visceral way than we ever have in our living memories, because of the democracy of this virus.